Coming up on this week's show, John Carmack defends AI Quake.
A quirky handheld gets its first box game in 20 years.
And we go inside the world of Unreal Tournament with Neil Haldar.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our sponsor, our incredible friends at Bitmap Books. Now, of course, on this week's show, we're going to be talking Unreal Tournament. And have you seen their book, I'm Too Young to Die, The Ultimate Guide to First-Person Shooters, covering the years 1992 to 2002, the golden age of FPS games, and covering more than 180 titles. All the big ones are in there, including the ones that define the genre: Doom, Quake, Half-Life, GoldenEye 007, Halo, and a few that maybe flew under the radar and deserve your attention. You should definitely check it out, weighing in at more than 420 pages. See that and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 475, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the show, the podcast that each and every Friday, of course, celebrates all the wonderful things about the world of retro gaming and technology, brings you up to speed on what's been happening over the last 7 days, and welcomes on veterans of the industry for a chat about their career and the games that they worked on in the second half of the podcast. And this week, another massive name on the show that we'll talk about in just a moment. I'm hoping that I do manage to last the next 45 minutes or so, having just got off a plane from America yesterday. I think my body clock's still at like, 2 or 3 a.m. at the moment.
You sound quite chipper. I was expecting more jet lag.
Yeah, well, I'm fueled by about 3 cups of black coffee at the moment, Ravi, and it's not even 10 a.m. So we'll see how the rest of the day goes. But I just want to say, we are going to do more about the event that I was at over the weekend. For regular listeners, you'll know that I went out to VCF, the Vintage Computer Federation, that was held in New Jersey. An amazing little event. I know you've been there as well, Ravi. I say little event, actually it was a big event, because we were walking around the venue that it's held on. It's like you said to me before, it's like an military base, isn't it, when we do VCF? And there's there's a radio museum there, lots of old ham radio stuff, got radars and old World War II communication equipment. Really fascinating place. But then around this time of year, every year, basically us computer nerds take over the place, and there's exhibitors, there's stuff that you can buy, and there's just so much, and it's all kind of spread out over this base. And on the second day, I walked around and found another building that I completely missed on the first day. And I was like, what? It was a room where they were giving away free stuff.
This is the thing. Dan was messaging me going, have you seen this? I want to get this. And then realizing, he's catching a plane back.
Yeah.
And you can't shove an old Mac or an IBM mainframe or something in the overhead locker.
It was crazy though, because I'll talk a bit more about why I was there in a moment. But there's this room where you probably seen it when you were there. There's racks and racks on the wall of free stuff. And it was Commodore printers and all that were given away there. And then there's a big for sale area. And you and I are quite into collecting vintage Apple stuff. And really, Apple wasn't as popular over here until kind of the mid-2000s. So all the 80s and 90s stuff, a little bit harder to get here, but there was old Power Macs and, the clamshell iBook G3s. They're selling them for £20-30, or Performers, that kind of thing.
It's a different world, isn't it? People, I think they came up and they put a little tag on it when it was sold last time.
Yeah.
And then, gradually over the kind of weekend, you saw stuff disappear and items. And it's got a real kind of, swap shop, trader swap fair vibe, which I think is really nice, actually. And it's quite a unique American thing, that is.
Yeah, it was an incredible place, and I think the big difference for us is a lot of the gaming shows that we go to over here and in Europe, they're very much kind of console focused, aren't they? A lot of them are more gaming focused, which of course we love. But this one, as you pre-warned me before I went, Ravi, purely for the hardcore computer geeks, which I love, because actually jumping ahead a bit on the second day, we got a train journey back from New Jersey to Manhattan, where we were staying, for a few days either side. And a few of the guys from the show, got to give a shout to John, who's one of the guys who I met out there, one of our listeners. We're all on the train just basically chatting about CPU instruction sets
Nice.
And graphics cards and stuff on the train
The
for
other
about 3 hours.
passengers are like, what?
Yeah, including my wife, who I think I turned over, she's having a little nod at some stage of that journey. But yeah, it was incredible. So, and I met so many Retro Hour listeners out there.
That's amazing, isn't it? Like,
Blew my
we
mind.
we kind of put the podcast out, but going out, across the great big ocean and then meeting people, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It was nuts. But I mean, the reason that I was really out there was to not only experience the event, but also to host some panels that we did to celebrate the Commodore Amiga's 40th birthday, because it is 40 this year. So I did 2 big roundtables. The first one was with Dale Luck, Ron Nicholson, Glenn Keller, Andy Finkel, Jeff Porter, Randall Jessup, Peter Cherner. He was on the panel as well. This was literally a who's who of like Amiga all-stars, the guys. This one was really focused on the beginnings of the Amiga, and looking through that list, I don't think we had Randall Jessup on the show, but he's the only one out of that list we've ever spoken to on the podcast.
We need to get him on.
Well, we're gonna.
I think you were in your element there, and it still sounds like you are, because you're like massively excited about it still when you even talk. It's great.
I was on such a high, obviously just meeting some of my heroes, and I did a 90-minute panel with them on the Saturday, which thanks to Amiga Bill, who anyone in the Amiga community will know, he actually recorded it for us. We're going to broadcast that on next week's podcast, and also Bill is going to join us on the show next week as well to chat a bit more about VCF and what happened. So if you're out there and you want to hear the talk again, or you didn't and you're just curious, make sure you check out next week's podcast for more on that. But in the meantime, this week's show, we're going to be going deep inside the world of classic FPS games. Back to 1999 for a little game that started a lot of things, Unreal Tournament.
Yes, so this interview is really interesting. It's kind of about video game production and, the different levels of that. So we're talking with Neil Haldar, and Neil's a really interesting guy. Like, his path was great. He started as a medical student and then kind of gave up on being a medical student because he had such a passion for video games. Originally going into Panasonic with the 3DO. So, it's a very interesting system, the 3DO. A lot of stuff was developed for it, and it famously had those, other companies developing it, not just the 3DO company itself. Then the PlayStation arrived, and we talk about the kind of loss and the panic and the chaos that ensued when the PlayStation arrived, and everybody got a bit shook with 3DO. But then he moved into Sierra, which was really interesting as well, because Sierra, they had lots of different divisions. So he was in the division Dynamics, and they were doing a lot of PC titles, and this has really, really got his teeth into video game production. And then later on, GT Interactive, and of course, Unreal Tournament. I was just wondering, like, Joe and Dan, have you guys played Unreal Tournament much?
Really, I think I played the Dreamcast version more than any other. In more recent years, though, 'cause I didn't have a Dreamcast back in the day. But actually, in terms of FPS games on the Dreamcast, really did quite enjoy playing that a few years ago. But obviously, it is one of those kind of genre-defining games, isn't it, Unreal Tournament?
It's so, in my life, it's so huge. I would play it after school.
You were the PC gamer among us back then, weren't
Yeah,
you,
so literally the loading screen of Unreal Tournament was like the background of my computer. I had it on that much. And, we'd have online clans and multiplayer. It's fantastic. And, Neil was actually part of like the marketing team with that, pushing it, making sure everybody's together. And there's a hilarious story about the mess up that they did with the boxers and lorries going across the country that I think people are really going to enjoy. But then later on, he went to MGM Studios as well. And MGM Studios is really interesting because they had all the 007 licenses. Yeah. And this is, of course, after GoldenEye. So it's really interesting to talk about it because, The World Is Not Enough came out, and then there was quite a few other Bond titles. And this is, when Neil really got into video game production, but also he's done so much more after as well. It's one of these interviews, where we stop at a certain point in time and I'm like, I could go on for hours chatting to Neil.
There'll be a part 2 at some point then, eh?
Yeah, I really hope you folks enjoy this because it's just me doing it solo, this one.
Yeah, hours away, and Joe's getting ready to go on holiday. Well, kind of like ships in the night around this time of year, and he's working every hour. So, Ravi hopped on this one solo. So, looking forward to this one. Neil Haldar, he's our special guest coming up on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, we have got actually some news about that World Is Not Enough prototype that has surfaced this week that you may have seen, kind of tying into this week's interview. More on that in the way in just a minute. But this one, when I was away last week, I saw this all over. And actually, this has caused probably the most fierce debate that I've seen in the retro gaming world so far in 2025. Some real strong opinions about this. Now, this is a Microsoft Copilot demo that they released a couple of days ago. And actually, everyone, when I was at VCF over the weekend, was talking about this. This guy actually pulled out his laptop to show me this. He said, "Have you seen this? It's landed today." And everyone was kind of, again, either on the side of this is really cool or this is going to kill the gaming industry. But this is a playable version of Quake 2 that Microsoft have released onto their Copilot AI website that runs entirely on generative AI. Joe, you did try this on your PC that really you mainly just use for doing the podcast, which I think might even struggle to play the original Quake on that machine, in all honesty. But you got this running in your web browser.
Yep.
Now, just before we get into what it is, I mean, kind of give us your impressions of having played this so it's only a 2-minute short demo anyway, isn't it?
I got it running at about 3 or 4 frames per second, maybe. I couldn't line up a shot. It was way too sensitive. The enemies looked like see-through ghosts. They were just like blinding lights, like as they ran at me, shooting me. So I died immediately. It took about 5-10 minutes for it to load, and I had to refresh the page twice, but that could be down to my PC. And it was like, when AI, about a year or two ago, I remember Ravi sending us like loads of funny pictures, like, it was like Limp Bizkit getting married, and it like, it like melts the hands together and all this kind of stuff. It was a little bit like that for me. I don't know if it was like that for you guys, but like, the little health and armor pickups, like they weren't the right shapes. They were kind of like a bit like, I can only explain it as like AI twisted.
I get what you're saying.
They didn't quite look right. Then they didn't quite move right and stuff like that. So like part of me is like, well, a large part of me was just like, I was on, on the phone to Ravi as I did it, on chat with Ravi. And I was like, this is terrible.
Yeah.
This is awful.
Yeah.
Like I don't get the hype. But I guess the hype is because it's AI.
It is, yeah, you're right. It's unplayable at the moment, really. It's definitely a demo. And some people have described it almost like what it would be like if you had a dream about playing Quake 2.
Well, yeah. It's interesting if you think about what they're trying to do. So they're trying to sell this Copilot gaming experiences. They've obviously fine-tuned this demo. It's based on Quake 2, so it's already based on a piece of source material.
Which video they fed into it to teach it.
Yeah, which is, it's also the Willed and Human Action Model, WHAM, which is a generative AI. So all it is really a generative version of Quake 2 that they've kind of finely tuned and presenting. It doesn't seem that different from maybe procedural generation or something for me. It's basically a level design. They've already got the rules in there because it's learnt the rules, it's seen them. I'm not that impressed, to be honest. I also don't trust Microsoft when it comes to AI. Years ago, they put out some like AI results about space and NASA on their AI, and it was all completely wrong, and they used it as promotion for it. This, to me, seems like promotion for this Copilot gaming experiences. I don't think the basic level of it would be like this. What would impress me would be if they said, come up with a completely unique FPS and design it from scratch, where this just seems to be emulating or kind of cloning something. Obviously, it's a bit faster. It's got level design in there. It's got all that kind of stuff, which can frustrate people and take away people's jobs and stuff. But I think it's nowhere near what people are kind of saying it's going to be like, in my personal opinion.
Well, looking at, the way it works is, as I kind of touched on there, Microsoft basically fed a load of video footage of someone playing Quake 2 into their AI model. It then watched the footage to learn what the game world should look like and what it should behave like when the player moves around. And interestingly, you're not interacting with a real game engine when you play this. So when you press a key...
it's designed the kind of engine.
Yeah, well, basically, it's imagining what the next frame should look like based on what it learned from the video. Then it draws it on the screen so it appears like a moving image. So someone described this. Imagine describing your movements to an artist, saying, I turn left and I shoot the enemy. The artist then quickly paints a new scene showing that. That's what the AI is doing, but it's doing it really quickly.
But then it's quite like the basic, you used to get like a picture and you could extend it with AI and it would imagine what's going to happen in the next part. So like that, it's kind of like that. It's not creating a full new concept. It's just, learning something that's already there and expanding on it a bit, which is impressive, but it's not massively groundbreaking for me at the moment.
Although one of the biggest defenders of this, interestingly, has been John Carmack, obviously the co-creator of Quake, who's spoken up saying that, he's defended this demo, saying that he thinks it can really expand games teams' creative possibilities. And he said that actually he sees tools like this as really empowering designers and small studios. And yeah, admittedly, as you touched on there, Ravi, it could reduce game developer jobs. How he said, farming change with technology was an example that he gave. But he reckons that, still top-tier games will still come from passionate human teams and AI will exist as a tool. But also he mentions that it will be good for maybe, testing-level design. That would be a good way of kind of just seeing how it basically works before they fully creative.
John Carmack's also invested in quite a few AI startups and technology. And also he's a big, proponent of it. He talks about it a lot.
Yeah.
So I can see, for me, like innovation and stuff with like level designs and stuff, that's always going to be down to a human. It's weird. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I don't think this is, don't quit your job yet.
But then, you mentioned, ChatGPT's only been around, 2 or 3 years now, saying this stuff is moving fast. I think the fact that it can basically hallucinate something that's, vaguely near a game.
That's a nice way of putting it. Hallucinate something that's vaguely near. It's like a dream, isn't it? It's like a weird dream version of Quake.
Yeah, and it's definitely just a demo at the moment. And I think, maybe, as John said, it could be good in that kind of ideas stage of, coming up with something. But
just as like you use AI to suggest stuff, but you're not going to get it to write a novel for you.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be making next year's Call of Duty just yet. So, I think rest easy. So if you want to check it out, then you can play it right now in your browser. It is free. It's just 2 minutes long, so I'll link that in this week's show notes. Interesting to know your thoughts on that. Here's a platform that we don't see many new releases for. We get excited when a new game comes along for the Neo Geo or the Dreamcast or the Game Boy. We cover a lot of those regularly in the news. Can't remember the last time we talked about a new title being released for the Nokia N-Gage.
I don't think we've ever spoke about a title coming out on the Nokia N-Gage. Have you guys ever played a Nokia N-Gage? I was thinking about this earlier on.
Yeah. Interestingly, because I was watching a YouTube video a few weeks ago now, and someone was talking about how, what a colossal disaster the N-Gage was for Nokia. For those who don't remember, this was basically a handheld games console that doubled up as a mobile phone that Nokia released in 2004, 5, I want to say, maybe a little bit earlier. But then one of the comments I read that made me think was, this video was from such an American perspective. The N-Gage was actually quite successful in another part of the world.
I remember one person had one at college, and when you played the games, I think there was adverts within.
Really?
Some of the games, yeah. And I was like, what? We're probably used to that nowadays. But when I first saw that, I think it was Tomb Raider that he had on it, but it was a very narrow field of view, wasn't it?
Well, it did sell 3 million units, which, obviously wasn't going to topple the Game Boy Advance. But, I think that's probably more than I expected it sold.
That's more than I thought it sold. I thought it was in the thousands, the hundreds of thousands. I didn't realize it was 3 million, but I guess I
remember seeing them everywhere back in the day. Do you?
I remember seeing them in a game station in town in Nottingham a lot. And I think I'm the same as you, Ravi. I think I knew one person who got one. And then I remember going to Asda with my mum, and I remember seeing somebody on the phone to one. And I remember going to school the next day and telling everybody at school how stupid it looked. because you had to hold it like sideways.
Yeah.
So it like proper stuck out. So, imagine you're on the phone to somebody, for those who don't know, like your iPhone, but you're holding the side of the iPhone to your ear rather than like the flat bit, which I always thought was bizarre. And a lot of videos I've watched on the N-Gage, a lot of people put its failure down to like the form factor and then the fact that you need to like take it apart to change a game. Like you have to take the battery out.
I don't know what the battery life was like as well. Yeah. You sell games, like you're not in video game market recently. If you got a load of N-Gages, is that something that you would start to sell?
Well, yeah. If I randomly got a load of them, I wouldn't keep them, but I wouldn't go out my way to buy them.
Yeah,
I did see one N-Gage game on Sunday at the Nottingham Games Market, and it was It was the Elder Scrolls game that randomly came out on the N-Gage, and it was sealed. And I think it was about £200. And it was the only one I saw.
I'm looking on eBay now, the prices of them. I mean, look, a used one unboxed here for £280.
Yeah.
There's one for over £2,000 on here at the minute.
Jesus. Yeah. But anyway, the reason we're talking about it is there has been a game by Low-Tech who did the Parasite games, the Flea games, the Tapeworm game.
We had them on.
Yeah. Episode 420.
Yeah. They've done the Parasite pack for the N-Gage, which is those 3 games all in one cartridge. And they're boasting this is not the first release in 20 years, but the first fully boxed, complete release for the N-Gage in 20 years. It comes with a manual in the box and everything. It's such a funny, quirky thing that they've done, and it was for sale on Etsy. So I thought I'd have a quick look and see how much it was. It sold out straight away.
Yeah, straight away, yeah.
So
that's interesting. Do you think that's N-Gage owners, or do you think it's just people who want it on the shelf as a bit of novelty?
I think it's just collectors. Because like you say, 3 million of them worldwide. I mean, I don't know how many copies Low-Tech did.
100 apparently.
100, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I imagine that's more supporters of Low-Tech, supporters of the games Flea and Tapeworm.
I love the detail that they've put into this, like the box, and even it's got that end seal holographic strip for that nostalgic unboxing experience. So I guess there was like a holographic strip for genuine games and stuff.
They've proper made it look really, really legit. Also, they didn't just whack it on an N-Gage cartridge and put it out. They did actually port it, so they have actually remade it so it works on the phone screen ratio as well of 11:13. So they have actually redesigned the games to work properly on the N-Gage as well. So it's not just like a novelty, keep it on the shelf. Like they actually play and run, on the N-Gage, like fine. I wonder how many of those 100 cartridges, though, how many buyers have actually opened it and played it, though. I'm going to say less than 10, I reckon.
Which makes it, a very niche club, which I think is very cool. I couldn't remember what N-Gage boxes look like. So seeing the images on here with the logo on there, the cartridges look very much like Switch cartridges, don't they?
They do.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And one thing that I love is that they've actually included ringtones as well.
Yes.
Based on some of the characters and some of the levels, which is wicked, getting those. Because I used to love inputting ringtones and polyphonic ringtones.
Did you ever buy them from those adverts in magazines at the back, and you'd have to call a certain number and then enter the code and pay like £3 for them?
We'd all sit there in the IT lessons at school going, do, inputting ringtones. That's all we did.
It's interesting, though, because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I would like an N-Gage now. But I remember seeing them probably 10, 15 years ago and going for about £15 and not being bothered. And typically I want one now, they go for several hundred. But it looks like there is something decent to play on it, a recent game. So if you're a fan of those titles, I mean, they're fantastic indie games anyway, aren't they? Like you said, we did have Alistair from Low-Tech on the podcast a while back. So if you want to hear more about that, check out that episode. But yeah, so you can check out Flea 2 and Tapeworm Disco Puzzle on your Nokia N-Gage. So the fact that it sold out that quickly, you'd imagine they might do a second run. Because, sold out 100 copies in a week. It's pretty good going. So we'll link up that Etsy page if you want to keep an eye on that. Now, kind of tying in to this week's interview with Neil Haldar. He's on the show in around 15 minutes from now. But it seems that there are some early Nintendo 64 prototypes of kind of the follow-up game to GoldenEye, even though it wasn't by Rare, but it was like the next Bond title on the N64 that Neil actually worked on. The World Is Not Enough. Now, this is an interesting video from Hard4 Games, and they found 2 different versions of the development carts of this game.
Yeah, interestingly, with the interview, you'll hear later that Neil kind of joined when all this was established, so probably didn't see these ones. But it's really interesting to see because, like you said, it's a very interesting story with it being the follow-up of GoldenEye and being a very different kind of game to GoldenEye as well, following more of kind of a story mode, but also that multiplayer experience at GoldenEye was totally different. But what's your history with this game, Joe? I know you're a GoldenEye and 007 fan.
I've never played it.
You've never played it? Wow.
I have no affiliation with The World Is Not Enough. Unfortunately, I think I've seen the film once when I was a teenager, but I've never ever played the game. I know I've seen a lot of videos about it, and some YouTubers, have said it's actually a better game than GoldenEye. It just didn't get the love that GoldenEye got, and obviously it wasn't developed by Rare. It was developed by Eurocom.
Yeah, it was a different engine, wasn't it? So, Rare went on to do like a total different.
They did Perfect Dark.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've heard it's got more weapons. The missions are a little bit more in depth. There's a few more gadgets and stuff like that.
Well, it was also released for the PlayStation as well. So I guess this is like an early alpha version that is different from the actual final release.
It's actually 2 versions. So the guys that run this channel, it's Tony and John. They've got 2 prototype cartridges of it. One is a near final debug version, full of unlocks and everything in there as well. The other is a really early alpha build that's got a load of glitches and still got placeholder graphics in there. A load of the textures are missing. It's got broken mechanics and stuff in there too. So it's kind of an interesting look at how that development progressed between those 2 releases. So yeah, it's quite an interesting look at that.
Yeah, it's making me want to get it. Before we started recording, Dan asked if it was a Rare game. And I was like, I think it is, but I've just looked it up. It's literally the exact same price of GoldenEye. It's like £10 for the cartridge, or kind of $25-30 for a full complete copy. Annoyingly, the American version of it's got a blue cartridge, but the PAL copy is just a standard grey cartridge.
Oh, if you'd have said that last week, Joe, I probably could have got you one.
I know. But yeah, I want to check this out now. I want to play the actual, seeing the prototypes, the leaked prototypes of the games, making me want to play the original version. I love how that's got me. The news is that prototypes have come out, but I'm like, actually, you know what? This game, 25 years later, I want to play this game now.
Yeah. I think it actually did quite well, and it's quite a decent title. It's just GoldenEye was such a impactful, overshadowing kind of thing that in everybody's memory, that's just their default go-to.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're completely right. Like you say, I don't think the sales are too bad on it or anything. It's just GoldenEye was like a cultural phenomenon, and it's just hard to follow up on that. Yeah,
so if you want to play these 2 builds of it, they've actually uploaded these to archive.org. So if you're interested in kind of looking how the game developed, it is fascinating look at it, I think. So I'll shove that in this week's show notes, and give us your thoughts, Joe, when you finally play the full thing as well.
Oh, dear.
Now, another story that we kind of touched on actually last week. Little behind the scenes kind of peek at what we do. Obviously, I was away on holiday. We recorded last week's show a week early. So we kind of missed the Nintendo Direct headlines. But of course, we did mention that the rumor was that GameCube games and a GameCube controller were coming to the Switch too. And it turns out there's going to be GameCube games available right at launch, with 3 games landing on day 1.
Yeah. I think I said this in the after hours, and then I said it at work, like the day after this was announced. And I think it's funny how it's like, we could finally pay, GameCube games. And I'm just like, hang on. Like, we've finally got a modern console powerful enough to play the GameCube. And I'm like, hang on, wait. Could the GameCube not play GameCube games? It's like, I always find it so bizarre. It's the way these articles are written.
Go and pay £450 to play GameCube games.
Yeah, I always find it so funny that it's like, something's powerful enough to emulate it, and I'm like, I'm sure, as well as playing the GameCube, the Wii, or the Wii, the Wii U or whatever, I'm sure we can emulate this. We've been able to emulate this kind of stuff well for a long time. But anyway.
I was going to ask you, how much does a GameCube generally go for secondhand?
It depends on what colour and version it is and stuff like that. But anywhere from 50 quid upwards. You know, the black and the purple ones between like 50 and 100 if they've got like official controllers and, you know, memory cards with them and stuff like that. But obviously you can get much more expensive ones because there was like the Resident Evil 4 one and there was the Panasonic Q. There was a pearl one and, you know, the silver one tends to be a little bit more expensive.
Well, UK pricing for the Switch 2 launches Thursday, 5th of June. £395.99 for the console, or £429.99 if you get the Mario Kart World Bundle, which does look very good. But yeah, so as you said, there is much cheaper ways to play GameCube games if that's your main draw.
Yeah, so, but one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it is, like you say, free games are launching with it, which are Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, which I think is a really good choice, F-Zero GX, which was the final F-Zero game, or the final main release F-Zero game. So that's cool to see F-Zero getting some love. I had that as a kid, loved it. And then Soul Calibur 2, some people would argue is the best Soul Calibur. I'm assuming it's going to be the game, well, it is the GameCube version, so it'll come with Link. And then other games that are coming out not long after, which is what I wanted to discuss. Luigi's Mansion, Super Mario Strikers, Mario Sunshine, but then a couple of obscure rarer games, Pokemon XD, Gale of Darkness, Chibi Robot, Pokemon Colosseum, and Fire Emblem. And what I thought was really interesting about that is, so we've just spent the last 5 minutes talking about how there's cheaper ways to pay the GameCube, but GameCube games, especially in America, some of them have become particularly expensive, and I'm talking like $500, you know, and in the UK, you know, like £200-300, including some of these games, Pokemon XD, Chibi Robot, and Fire Emblem. And some articles are saying, is there somebody in, you know, Nintendo Japan who's kind of keeping an eye on the games market and kind of like done this as like here's a cheaper way now to, or here's
screw the scalpers.
Yeah, screw the scalpers kind of thing. Like, rather than having to pay almost, you know, $600-700 on a GameCube setup and Fire Emblem to play Fire Emblem officially, here's a way you can now play it on your, yes, you're going to have to buy a Switch too, but here is an official, potentially cheaper way of playing it, and might potentially bring these games back down in terms of pricing. Like, there will always be rare, expensive games, but it's just interesting that they've picked like 3 or 4 very rare GameCube games that didn't, as far as I know, didn't sell particularly well, as well as like the huge games like Soul Calibur 2 and Mario Sunshine. I just thought it was a really interesting direction for Nintendo, but also very cool to see. But I said to a friend at work, because he was like, oh my God, I need the GameCube controller. I was like, that's going to sell out straight away. That's, you know.
Did last time, didn't it?
You know, the N64 and the Super Nintendo and the Mega Drive one sold out. And that's going to be 60 quid for the GameCube controller. So.
Which ain't bad.
It's not bad, but it's going to get pretty expensive.
You think they'd do like Super Smash Bros. As the one of the launch ones?
Yeah, you would have thought, actually.
Maybe they're waiting.
Yeah.
Like a pack or something.
A lot of people say Super Smash Bros. Melee, the GameCube one, is like the greatest one. You know, it's still used a lot of tournaments and stuff, and that's why so many people still use
that would
GameCube
sell controllers.
Yeah.
You know, yeah,
100%. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. That's a good point, Rabbit. Check you out with your Nintendo knowledge.
Well, they kind of roll a few of these out like every couple of weeks, don't they? Like in kind of batches of 2 or 3 usually, if the N64 and Game Boy games that they've done on the Switch up till now or anything to go by. So I imagine it won't be long until that's on there. And I think it does make sense that, you know, if they want to sell those controllers quickly, that'd be a way to do it. You didn't mention that point there, though, about kind of whether it'll affect the aftermarket price of these rarer games. I don't think it will, though, personally, because I think, you know, there's not many people who are going to be paying £500 for one of these rare games like, you know, Path of Radiance just because they want to play the game, is there? If you want to play it, surely you can just download an emulator and play it on your EverDrive, or, you know, a ROM rather, and play it on your EverDrive, or just buy an emulator. If that's the only reason you want it, I imagine the people that pay that kind of money want to have the original in their collections.
Yeah, I agree, but it goes one way or the other with these games. Sometimes it brings the price down, sometimes it, you know, retains that high price, or it just, you know, keeps them going up and up, or you see it come down briefly. But I'm going to keep an eye on it and see what happens to it when the Switch does come out in June.
Are you thinking of getting a Switch 2 then, Joe?
I was like, absolutely not. 400 quid, you know, that's silly. And then I saw some footage of Mario Kart World Tour, and I was like, yeah, that looks
exactly the same as me.
I was like, that looks pretty fun. And then I've forgotten what it's called already, but the From Software game that isn't Bloodborne 2, but definitely is Bloodborne 2, which is going to be exclusive. That doesn't come out until 2026.
Oh, the Dustbloods.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm a massive From Software, Souls games fan. And my mate James messaged me straight away, and he was like, it's going to be like 550 quid to play the next Souls game, mate. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm saving up for GTA 6 in the console.
That's interesting. I mean, do you think GTA 6 might land on the...
There's rumours that it's going to be £100.
I'm saying, do you think it'll come out on the Switch too?
No, I don't think it'll.
Well, no, I don't think.
Yeah.
Unless they do it in the way that, like, I just played GTA 5 for the Xbox 360, which it had that kind of old take it down, reduce some of the graphics. Maybe that will work.
Well, that was the original version, wasn't it?
That's the original version. Yeah. It came out on Xbox 360 like a year before it came out on Xbox One. But I was just going to make a joke. They might actually release GTA 5 on the Switch too.
Squeeze a few extra quid out of that over a decade-old title now. So, I mean, we've apart from Ravi, we've been big supporters of the Switch on this podcast.
This is going to be the huge failure of Nintendo.
I went to the Nintendo. I went to the Nintendo store in New York last week, and I sent pictures, and Ravi messaged me back. I was enjoy it before they go bankrupt.
Closing down sale. This is an internal joke, by the way, folks. I predicted that the Switch would be the failure of Nintendo, and I've never lived it down since.
But what's your prediction for the Switch 2 then, Ravi? Success or not?
Of course.
It's doomed now.
Up on that line.
So, but I'm looking forward to seeing more like kind of indie retro stuff coming out next. I think the Switch is a great platform for that. So, so if you want to get hold of one of those, coming out on start of June the 5th. So I'll link that, and of course all the rest of the stories you don't have to Google around. I save you the job. I put them in the show notes every week on your podcast app, or you can click through from the website, theretrohour.com. All right, now we have got a couple of extra news stories on the way just for our wonderful patrons. A couple that didn't make the main news. We'll do that in just a second. We do that on every week's podcast, by the way. A little reminder, if you haven't joined our wonderful patrons community, that's just one of the perks that we give you. You get an ad-free version of the podcast with about 10 to 15 minutes of extra news stories every single episode. And we do, of course, I think the main draw for a lot of our patrons is our incredible Hangouts, of which we just had one this weekend. Gone.
It was the best one yet because we had no Dan Wood, so we could just
we just
moan about it and just tell all the bad stories.
Just said how terrible he is.
I was on stage doing my talk at BCM. Otherwise, I would have been on. And if the Wi-Fi wasn't as crap as it was.
Yeah, you could have Skyped us. But no, it was Skype. God, Skype's just gone bankrupt. But no,
it was... Retro through and through, Ravi. It
was a fantastic chat. We've added to our Discord a new room, movies, because we're talking about movies so much. And I think that's one thing that really kind of flows with the podcast, video games and video game movies, but also just general sci-fi and like 90s movies. It was great to chat and really good to get together with everybody. And, every time we do it, there's always like somebody new as well joining, which is really nice. And we get listeners from all over the globe on that.
But of course, we also do, there's a new episode of our bonus podcast just for our gold members or above, the Retro Hour After Hours, that will be out very, very soon. And there's 46 back episodes of that you can check out. So lots of perks for being a member of our wonderful patrons community. And this week, we've actually got 4 new patrons to induct into the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming. Let's get them into the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame.
A massive welcome to Nikola Novakovic,
Alex,
Jeremy Smith,
and Gary, who all became patron members over the last couple of weeks. Hugely appreciate your support, and if you'd like to join our wonderful patrons community, all the details to sign up right now are on the website at theretrohour.com. All right, our special guest talking about Unreal Tournament and lots more as well, Neil Haldar. He's coming up on the podcast in just a second. Before we do that, though, let's take a moment to give a massive thank you to this week's sponsor. It is our good mates at Shopify. Now, if you're a regular listener, you'll know all about our wonderful mates at Shopify. Just an incredible all-in-one commerce platform, whether you sell in person or online. They've got everything you need to start, run, and grow your business. Because you know what it's like at the moment? 2025 feels like everyone has got a bit of a side hustle going on, or maybe you're thinking of setting up your own business, becoming your own boss. Shopify has got everything you need that you can just focus on the thing that you enjoy doing, the product that you make. For example, we've been selling our Retro Hour books via Shopify for the last year. I've got a mate who designs t-shirts and puts them on there as well. He sells them all via Shopify. The reason is because it's just such a convenient, easy to use platform.
It's so easy. You know, you can sell physical items on there.
Yeah.
Sell digital items as well, so they get instant delivery. Physical are great because you can get it tracked. You can also, you know, have different zones and regions with all the different prices and costs as well, which Shopify really helps with because it can be complex, you know, sending stuff out worldwide. It's really intuitive. You know, the checkout system's great. You can use Stripe payments. You can use, you know, many of the credit card systems out there and know that it's kind of secure, but also you've got your point of sale system as well. So in person, you can do some sales at like an event or a video game market.
And it keeps your inventory combined, doesn't it? So, you know,
yes,
it's the same online and in person as well. So it keeps it all tracked. And it can even get you selling across social media, you know, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok as well. Full of industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth and give you complete control over your business. Best thing about it is, like I said, really easy to use. No new skills in design, no coding, anything like that. They do it all for you. And when you do need help, there is award-winning help and an extensive business course library available 24 hours a day. So Shopify are ready to support your success every step of the way. So if you sell anything at all, why don't you give Shopify a try today? Now, of course, we've got you an incredible offer. If you haven't tried this yet, you might have heard us talking about this. Lots of people are taking it up. Please give it a try because it helps out the podcast as well. If you're thinking of giving Shopify a go, try it out for just £1 a month by using our exclusive link, shopify.co.uk/retrohour, all lowercase. I'll put it in this week's show notes so you can click straight through, shopify.co.uk/retrohour, and get ready to take your business to the next level today and hear a lot more of this. Right then, we can check out all this week's news stories in the show notes. You can click straight through from theretrohour.com. You don't have to Google. I'd save you the job every week. All the show notes on the website and in your app. And next, we are going to be going inside the world of Unreal Tournament with this week's special guest, Neil Haldar. He's on the way next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we're here today with Neil Haldar. And Neil did some absolutely fantastic games on Unreal Tournament, which, you know, I'm a huge fan of, but he's worked with some great companies as well, Sierra Online, Dynamics, GT Interactive, and he was also the vice president of MGM Studios. So we're going to be talking a bit about, you know, video game movie licenses, which is a really interesting area. First, Neil, we're going to start off with a question that we ask all of our guests, which was, what's the first kind of video game that you remember that was in your memories that really stood out to you?
Oh, wow. I mean, thanks. First of all, I just wanted to say thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you.
You know, I was very lucky. I conned my parents into thinking that I absolutely had to have a computer growing up. And so they splurged, and I had this very lovely, expensive Apple IIe system with dual 5.25-inch floppy drives and an actual color monitor and a 9-pin dot matrix printer. I had all sorts of stuff.
That is a real setup.
That's a very old setup. Many of my friends had Commodore 64s, and I sort of kicked myself, you know, as they would play games, and there certainly weren't as many games available for Apple. But one of the games that did come out that is classic is Karateka from Electronic Arts. And it was the first game that I played like crazy, and I finished. And it was such an incredible sort of this feeling of accomplishment when I was young. It was like, yes, I finished this game.
And it's a beautiful game as well, isn't it? I think it was rotoscoped, really stunning title.
You know, and for its time, it gave me that illusion, right, of I'm someplace else, right? And so when I reached the end of the game and I finished it, I felt triumphant, but there was a large part of me that just simply wanted more. I want to continue with this character. I want to continue with this story. I want to continue, like I learned so much about how to play the damn game and kicking and punching and things. Like, now what? And ultimately, I blame somewhat my love for that experience as to why I got into games, because I love the adventure so much. I love the chance to be whisked away into this fictional world that I didn't want to leave. And so I ended up learning how to make fictional worlds for others.
I was wondering that because, being an Apple, it was a computer. So you kind of had a bit of a kind of utilities and, stuff that you could use. Were you wondering how these were made and like just playing around with them?
And it was really simple back then, right? Because obviously everything fit inside of a floppy disk. So it wasn't a lot of information. The ability to do bitmap graphics and things like that were the rage. And it was very simple and easy to be able to go into the disk with, utilities of the time and be able to change color values on artwork or color values of the character and things like that. And as I grew up on my Apple IIe and then later on an Apple II GS and which eventually became a Mac, I learned a lot about actually going in sort of at a bit level on the drive and understanding how to manipulate ones and zeros and change values and sort of fell into, I got a modem and I started BBSing and really learning a lot about how these games, how these applications, how the software came together and what it really took to build it. And back then it was nowhere near as complicated as it is today, but back then it was very straightforward.
Did you get involved in any mods then on BBSs?
Yeah, I did actually. There were several that I got involved in. I can't remember the name of them. None of the terrible ones or weird ones, but I made friends. I made friends and in a live working environment and it was all text and it was incredible and it was all fantasy and you'd meet with people and chat with them and have real conversations. And I remember on some of my text muds, there were people who quote unquote got married and all that sort of stuff. And, as a wide-eyed teenager, you think this stuff is incredible, right? This is the future. The future is virtual. This is amazing. Yes, of course.
And it's an early kind of online experience as well, I guess you were getting then.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I still, however, I always appreciated the business side. I always enjoyed the business side of, what does it really take to put these floppy disks into a box or into Ziploc bags with photocopied instructions and so on and so forth and sell them, right? And try to make money. I was always fascinated with the business side of how you made money with this stuff. And so it was an early gentleman that I befriended on one of these muds who was much older than I was. And he was an investor in a company that had certain patents around, sort of electronic camera images. And we ended up, staying up late one night and having this long drawn out text conversation. And I said, you should go talk to some of these companies. I named a bunch of companies. I was probably 16 or 17 at the time. And he messaged me a few weeks later. He goes, well, I took your advice and I actually met with a couple of those companies and we're going to sell to one of those companies. So anytime that we happen to get together, I owe you a ride on my boat is what he said. And I think that was a really powerful defining moment for me in my early days, pre-career, where I went, oh, I can actually do this. I can actually help people make money. I can actually make games and figure out strategy. I had no idea because I didn't know what that stuff was called back then. It was just like, oh, I know how to do this.
Making those connections as well, bringing like the right people together. I think that's really interesting that you kind of went directly to a gamer and, asked what the companies were. Kind of, that's a really cool move. As it kind of grew on technology as well, were you like keeping up with it? And I know you were doing medical school at the time, but were you like keeping your toe in technology as well?
So I appreciate the question very much. Yeah. So I was aiming for medical school with an undergraduate degree I was working on in molecular genetics. And I love learning about genetics. I love learning about sort of DNA, which ultimately is really the ones and the zeros that runs our bodies, right? And tells biological systems how to operate. And so, if you will, DNA is the software of our biology. And it's very interesting to me. And I was very fascinated by it. But unfortunately, you can't tell stories. You can't have characters. It doesn't work nearly the same, of course. And so I reached a point in my student years where I sort of reached a fork in the road. And the fork in the road was, if I don't try to go build something that's video games and software, I may regret it for the rest of my life. And I remember looking at my tiny studio apartment, and I thought to myself, all of this could burn down, everything, all the clothes and stuff in my kitchen. It doesn't really matter. As long as I get my computer, everything else is fine. I don't care. And that was the moment where I thought to myself, I have nothing to lose. If I try to go build a video game development studio from scratch, and I lose it all, that's okay. I haven't lost that much anyway. And so off I went with a little bit of good luck and some capital and an unfinished degree, and grabbed a bunch of friends, and I started a game development shop.
That's quite a risky thing to do as well. What were your parents saying? Were they like, "Oh my God, you've dropped out of medical to kind of go into this area"?
Yeah, they were completely unhappy. Yes, I mean, my dad was a surgeon, and he said things like "black sheep of the family" and "what are you doing?" and "this is a terrible idea," and I think after a couple of months, he was like, "Well, this is just a phase. It's just a phase. He needs to go through this phase." And little did he know, I was busy, whipping my friends around trying to get them to code and build things in 3D and make things sit on a CD-ROM and all sorts of stuff. Yes.
Well, yeah. So this period that you kind of started the studio was when the 3DO was coming out, and that was a really interesting system as well, because it had lots of different companies that would develop a 3DO as well. It was like a system that would be used by, I think, LG, Panasonic. There were quite a few companies, and you got involved with the guys from Panasonic, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so, Panasonic, I think, had been in a place where they were an early investor in 3DO with Trip Hawkins, and they had not yet announced a price point for the 3DO multiplayer, is what they called it. So they hadn't come out with how much is this thing going to cost, right? And I think somewhere in Panasonic's mind, they probably thought they could sell it for $1,000 or $1,100 or $1,200 or something like that. And there was a press conference, and Trip Hawkins was asked, well, how much is this device going to cost? And Trip, I think, kind of blurted out, oh, it's going to be $699 US. And of course, later I found out that the Panasonic guys had a freak out moment, because they thought to themselves, well, there's almost no profit in that. Now what do we do? Right? We're public as being a partner, and now there's a price point that's come out. And if we try to sell something at, $9.99 or $10.99 or something, like we'll be the laughing stock. Now what do we do? And so instead of walking away from their partnership with 3DO, they doubled down, and they decided to make up for the perceived loss of profit from the hardware side by becoming a software publisher. And that's when I met with Panasonic. Just serendipity.
It was a really interesting time, because you had so many systems coming out that wanted CD-ROM to be the future. I think there was the Amiga CD32, the CDI as well at the time. What really stood out with the 3DO? Was it that EA connection for you?
My gosh, no. Being perfectly honest, it was the cheapness of becoming a developer. I didn't have that much money, and so some of the other systems, like I didn't really believe in where CDI was going. It was a really neat system, but ultimately CDI didn't have the whole breadth of sort of a video game experience. Not the way that I thought of it.
It was quite interactive, wasn't it? Rather than, just strict video game kind of.
Yeah, that's right. It didn't have a lot of processing power. It could do some cool things with the CD. And so you could have branching video and things like that were unique and different. But at the end of the day, that wasn't the sort of the core competency of what I wanted to go work on. And on some of the other systems, like the Atari Jaguar, for instance, that also came out about the same time, Jaguar is interesting, and that was pretty cool. But the difficulty of making games for Jaguar also came with a fairly stiff licensing fee to become a developer to Atari. And so 3DO came along, and they said, well, anybody who has 10 grand, congratulations, you're a developer. And I was just like, well, I'm going to write you a check. Like those are some of the last of the money that I have, but I'll write you a check. So I did. And that's how we became
Yeah, got you off the ground then, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And they were quick to ship us a development kit, and it was incredible. And the documentation was wildly fully featured. I had earlier when I was a teenager, I had, gotten an Apple IIgs, and I had sort of like all this lovely Apple documentation. And if you're not familiar, like Apple's documentation is world class. It is amazing and incredible and up to date and so well put together. It makes all the difference when you go to develop for it. Not because you want to know how to develop for it, but you also need to know, like, what are all the error codes? And when I don't do it right, what happens? And how do I trace and go backwards in time and trap my error so I can fix my problems? I can fix the bugs. And 3DO's documentation was very similar. It was extremely well laid out so that somebody like me could sit down with volumes of text and go, oh, right, now I know how to do this thing. And, quite frankly, not that different than studying genetics at the time. Volumes of text of crazy sheer data and information being thrown at you. Sure, no problem. Got it.
Yeah, I guess your like medical background, you would kind of like bring on the text.
Yep. I
can imagine it was an interesting time to develop as well, because not that much stuff had happened on CD-ROM yet. Like, technologies like streaming onto CD-ROM, certain things like that were just starting, and it must have been kind of quite hard to implement it in those early days.
Yeah, there were a couple of projects that came out, products, I should say, that came out, like the Journeyman project, or what's another good one? Mist came out, right?
Yes, yeah.
And some of them required, or some of them were built using like early versions of Macromedia Director, which would later sort of become the guts of Flash. But yes, there was a lot of like really incredible multimedia sort of products that were coming out that were just taking advantage of all of this. And, you sit there and you think about, like, if you wanted to play Myst way back in the day when it first came out, gorgeous game, storied adventure and puzzles to fix and to solve and all this other stuff. Yeah, but you had to have like a, $4,000 computer with a $1,000 CD-ROM drive and, amazing amount of memory and so on and so forth. Like this was not for the faint of heart. And so, yeah, so the notion that there could be even a $700 CD-ROM based system that plugged into your television, came with controllers, allowed you to play real 3D games, was terribly exciting. And I was very happy to be a part of it all.
What titles were you working on then, and what was this kind of deal with Panasonic?
So we had come up with our own game idea. The game was called Biosphere, Biosfear. And being an initial developer, first game out of the chute, I think in hindsight, it was a little lightweight when it came to story, a little lightweight when it came to game mechanics. However, our budget, because we were based in a lower labor cost part of the US, we weren't in California or New York. We were in the middle of Ohio. Our budget was not that large. And so when we went to Panasonic and we said, well, we can build this 3D game and here's how much we need. And Panasonic said, what? That's it? Oh, well, I'd love to stop by and like double check your math. Like, really? And they did. They stopped by several weeks later. Bill Gardner from Panasonic remained friends to this day, although it's not like I talked to him all the time. I wish Bill well. Super good dude. He stopped by on his way to visit Panasonic's headquarters in Secaucus, New Jersey. We had a very lovely conversation. He bought our idea, hook, line, and sinker, and said, yep, I bet you can make these games for less expensive than what we're used to paying on the West Coast. Yep. And behind that came a visit from another gentleman who did technical due diligence and took us all out for dinner. And before we knew it, we were having conversations about what a contract might look like and how soon do we need the money.
That's amazing. Just going from that, getting the dev kit and then just going straight in there. I love that. I was just wondering then, with the announcement of the PlayStation, do you remember the kind of panic that set in and the kind of turning point with the 3DO where, stuff kind of started to slow down and people realized what a big impact the PlayStation would have?
There's a difficult moment for many developers as they are heads down trying to finish their projects. And I'd say that this usually happens in the last third of the time allotted to build the game. That last third, you're very heads down. You're very focused on finishing your work. It's this hyper focus moment for you and the organization. And I had made the mistake in summer of 95. I had wanted to sort of, if you will, treat the team or small team. And so we went to the first E3 in Los Angeles in 95. I brought everybody, artists, 2 programmers, myself, and had my 2 programmers, the only 2 we had, recruited out from under me. And so upon returning from E3, and this is the summer, of course, so late summer, the one programmer came to me and said, well, I'm not originally from Ohio and I can't stand the cold. And, soon the seasons will turn and I want to get back to where it's warm and I want to move back to the West Coast. And I'm giving you my 2-week notice. And I thought to myself, that's terrible. Like I'm so sorry. Like, and he sort of said, I was in LA and I realized how much I miss the sun. I miss the heat. And I thought to myself, I did this to myself. I feel terrible about this. I certainly want people to be happy and I don't want to, hold anybody. Like I asked him, like, could you work remotely or is there some other way we can make this work? Could you stick around for a little while? And I got, unfortunately, a bunch of no's. And so I sort of said, okay, well then I accept for 2 weeks. I'm so sorry. And I wish that this could be different. And 20 minutes later, the other programmer that I had on staff walked in and said, well, I met the other guy's sister and I've fallen in love and I think that she's the one. And so I'm moving with him and here's my 2 weeks.
My God, it sounds like a decimation. Just everyone completely going. Yeah.
Little did I know. And later I would find out that in fact, they had spoken with a recruiter at E3 and they had revealed how much they were making. Right. And of course it's Ohio. It's not California. And the recruiter had said, you could make so much more money. What are you doing? Why don't you move? And so that's what they had decided to do. As it turns out, the one did actually fall in love with the other guy's sister. And so there was truth to this. It's not that it was, all not true. However, I ended up having to call Panasonic and say, we're probably going to run late. And the technical due diligence guy was on the phone and he said, what are you going to do? You've lost the only 2 programmers you have. What are you going to do? And I remember telling him, I don't know yet. And so what I did do, after those 2 guys left, I was not going to let the ships burn. And so I taught myself programming all over again. I taught myself ANSI C, which is what 3DO used. And then I dug into our code, thankfully armed with a bunch of documents and very good documentation for 3DO. And inside of about 8 weeks, I started fixing bugs. And slowly the severity of the bugs that I was fixing started to grow. I started adding a menu structure. I started streaming audio from the disk, like Redbook audio, old stuff that now is easy to do. And before you know it, we started making terrific progress towards actually getting the game out the door. And we finally did. We shipped the final Gold Master, heads down, hyper focused, not thinking about the rest of the world. We shipped that Gold Master to Panasonic, I want to say just before Thanksgiving. They did a QA pass. We found one bug. We fixed the bug and shipped what would be the final version that we would ship to them at the beginning of December. And I waited with bated breath for my publisher to tell me that they had gone to manufacturing or that we were in retail or that it was available. And I heard nothing. And in its place, all the TV ads for PlayStation were running like crazy. And I remember buying a system, a consumer system, and I sat down and I played Ridge Racer once and then twice and then 3 times and 4 times and 5 times and 6 times. And I read about how, I think on the internet, I read about how you could play the game backwards. You could race backwards and get a slightly different game out of it. I played it that way once and I went, oh crap, we're in trouble.
Yeah, that at that point as well, that's really interesting that, you kind of got it out there and put that effort out, and then that kind of happened, like fate with the PlayStation. Did you hear any plans of the M2 machine as well? Was there kind of like a way that people were going to try and salvage this in Panasonic? Because I know a lot of titles from the 3DO ended up on the PlayStation eventually, quite a few were lost as well, sadly.
So there was a lot of discussion around M2. It was a different chipset. It was a different, I think it went from 16-bit to 32-bit, as I recall. There were a lot of differences and a lot of improvements, but I also think 3DO wasn't ready. I don't think that the designs were finalized. The hardware was ready. And quite frankly, I don't think the partners, the Panasonics, the Sanyos, the LGs of the world, I don't think that they had seen sort of the payoff in their investment from the first version of 3DO for them to all be on board with what was going to come next. And because of the way it was set up, 3DO was really just a hardware and software licensor. They relied upon somebody else to make the hardware. They relied upon somebody else to make the software. And the presumption was that if they sort of built both halves of the house, that people would have, profit and it would be a good time for the market. I just don't think 3DO got enough time, right? 3DO just didn't get enough time in the markets for the realization of that business model to come to fruition. And then along came PlayStation, and that was sort of the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I remember hearing some Konami arcade boards later had a bit of M2 technology in there, but that was the kind of only salvaged point of it. At what point did you then end up getting involved with Sierra and Dynamics as well?
There was the horrible "my life is ending" moment in early '96 with Panasonic, where they said no more publishing and we're done and your game will never ship and we're so sorry. And by the way, because we gave you this giant check to pay for the game, we own it all, and so you can't do anything with it. I laid everybody off and had to close down the company and dissolve the corporation and do all these horrible things. I had already thought about moving to the West Coast. And so I had made friends in the games industry. I ended up packing almost everything I owned into my car. And what didn't fit ended up in the rubbish bin. And off I drove from Ohio to California. I did it very quickly. I think in hindsight, I should have been more of a tourist. But I was in such a rush. I think I did it in like 2 days or 2.5 days.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. This giant trip that's, 3/4 of the width of America or something. I remember I was driving and I watched the sun go down in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and the sun came back up in Reno, Nevada. And then I hit the Rocky Mountains as you come into California. And somewhere around 12 or 12:30, 1 o'clock, I landed sort of at my friend's house just south of San Francisco. And he had come home from lunch and opened the house and gave me a key. And next thing I knew, I passed out on sort of like in the room that, I would be the roommate in. And he woke me up like, later, I thought that evening, and I'm like, oh, hey, I'm like, what's up? Like, oh, I fell asleep. He goes, you're going to sleep for a day and a half. Are you okay? I couldn't wait to get to the West Coast.
So you went out and did you already have like a contract with Sierra, or did you just headed out there in search of hope? There
had been a recruiter that I had begun talking to, and she had mentioned Sierra and Dynamics and Oregon. And as soon as she got to Oregon, I said, stop. Where is this state? Of course, I knew where it was, but it's sort of like, I don't think you heard me. I'm moving to California. Why would I want to go to Oregon? So I moved to California, this crazy long distance drive. I got a local job working at a sort of an internet.com startup. And it was sort of friends of friends. And so it was an easy job to get, but it wasn't great. It did pay, but it wasn't a great job. And it wasn't games. It was building internet stuff. And so there wasn't the story, the characters, the story arc, the reveal, none of that excitement. And so after about 2-3 months on the job, I reached back out to the recruiter and I said, this is not what I thought it was going to be. This is not really keeping me excited. Tell me about Oregon, if that's still available. And they sent me plane tickets the next day. And I went and visited the offices at Dynamics, which is a division of Sierra, and had a whole day of interviews. And before you knew it, I had a job offer to move to Oregon and be a producer. I took it.
That's amazing. And I'm just wondering what projects you kind of started on as well. And, what it was like going into PC game production compared to, consoles.
So I think that's a great question. Some of the projects I get to work on, the company, Sierra, had bought a early flight simulator company from Champaign, Illinois, called Sublogic. And I had been a consumer of Sublogic when I was a kid on my Apple II. And so to work with that team on a flight simulator called ProPilot was pretty awesome and pretty amazing. And so I worked with that team. They were already about halfway done trying to build their product. And so I did what I had learned at my own development shop. I whipped them, and told them to produce, and we all became friends, and we worked very hard together to try and ship the best product, the best flight simulator we could. I also worked on, Cyberstorm 2, and later got attached to what would become Red Baron 2. The sequel to the first Red Baron, classic Red Baron. All of these games, were great. All of them had really smart people working for them and smart teams and incredible QA. And behind all of that, was sort of the sausage being made in the back of the shop, right? Sort of the publishing and the marketing and the sales activity. And what do you do for PR? And how do you talk to, important editors at magazines and so on and so forth. And so I had to learn all the parts that I had not already done. I knew how to make the game mostly, and I kind of learned a lot from really smart people as well. But ultimately, my time at Dynamics and what I first started to do was a lot of the things that I already had to be great at. And at the time, there was a lot of similarity, I think, between the heavy documented CD-ROM based consoles and where PCs were going, which was also CD-ROM based, heavy Windows documentation. Slightly different because now you had lots of 3D card makers and even audio card makers that all wanted sort of to be a part of this, Creative Labs and early days of Turtle Beach and things like that. All wanted to make sure that we built games that were compatible with their systems. But yeah, it was pretty darn incredible.
Which creates a kind of a really interesting thing with testing as well, because you've got all these different systems that you have to try to accommodate for as well, and all these different manufactured PCs and like the introduction of graphics cards as well coming in.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
It was interesting doing flight sims as well, because as you mentioned with documentation, that's always quite a big part of that genre as well. But then going into RTSs as well, was it quite hard with like Cyberstorm to make it stand out from some other RTSs that were out there at the time?
I was very lucky on Cyberstorm. We had a game director, Graham Bayless, really intelligent, smart RTS designer and really game director who lived and ate and breathed RTS. And so my job on Cyberstorm was not to really direct the title, but to really work on the parts of the sausage behind the shop and not worry so much about how was the game being made. Graham had already built the first Cyberstorm and had been very successful with sort of like where that went with real-time strategy. And so Cyberstorm 2 was really his follow-up and how that was going to come together. But the job for that project was to support Graham and the team. And he had a fantastic, smart team that he had put together. And so my job was really just to make sure that like management was aware of like how much are we spending and how are things coming and is it on time and is marketing ready and how's the PR and so on and so forth. And I thank my lucky stars to have worked with someone so talented and so gifted. To this day, he still is truly this incredible mix of designer, producer, director, who really understands the business of making great product.
Well, I was wondering then how you got involved with GT Interactive as well, and what the kind of story of getting involved with Unreal Tournament was.
Sierra was going through changes. There were a variety of suitors who came along and wooed ultimately Ken and Roberta to sell the company. And we went through a number of name changes, Sendent, then Havas, for a while. Blizzard was a sister company, Knowledge Adventure and Davidson Associates, companies that were, used to building things that were more educational for children, on the software side. Like they were sister companies. You Don't Know Jack and those guys at Jellyvision in Chicago were a sister company. They sort of like built this very large software behemoth almost overnight, of which Sierra was part of that. As other suitors came and went, it was very clear that there was a lot of interest in shrinking cost centers and expanding profit centers. And because Dynamics within the Sierra family, Dynamics had always been seen as a bit of an R&D center. Some of the 3D technologies that were developed at Dynamics went on to become 3D engine and 3D code that lived in other games throughout Sierra. Sort of, if you will, at the time, it felt like the writing was sort of on the wall that there may not be a future in Oregon or at Dynamics, because if you came in and only looked at each operating entity geographically on their own, you would miss out on all of this leveraging of technology built someplace else that brought greater synergy to the whole. And I remember having conversations with some of the folks in management at the studio, hearing about how those conversations were going, some of the due diligence conversations. And I think at some point I realized that some of the suitors may not understand how some of this game project stuff gets built. And that didn't sound very good. So I went looking for jobs. I went looking for my next role. And among the ones that I applied to and had recruiters chasing for, was this executive producer role at GT.
Unreal Tournament was just one of those groundbreaking games. For me, I would sit there with just the screen on, because I play it so much. That was kind of the screen of my youth, pretty much, the loading screen there. The whole design of it was fantastic. What was it kind of like when it was all proposed and, stepping up from Unreal to create this kind of multiplayer version?
I stepped into the middle of, I wouldn't call it a firefight exactly. I stepped in the middle of that opportunity while it was already in flight. There had already been proposals from Epic as to what they wanted to go build. And they were already very sure of themselves. This is what they're going to build. It was up to GT whether they wanted to come along for the ride, if you will. Yes, there was money involved. Yes, there was some publishing stuff that was involved, but there was such, more so than I had ever felt on any other team. There was so much focus and energy and passion from the Epic team. It was clear from my very first phone call with them, this is going to be something different, right? It could blow up spectacularly and end up, a mess. And if it did, it would be a spectacular mess. But there was such, like I said, there was such energy and passion and truly focus, right? From the business side to the creative to the engineering, how they approached solving the various problems that they had to solve so they could build this experience. It spoke to me. It spoke to the boy who had wanted more out of Karateka. It spoke to this executive producer now at GT. And I thought to myself, this is world-class stuff. This is a world-class team, right? I've worked with great teams. These guys are some of the top, and they were so serious and so dedicated, and they had so much energy. It was very clear that they were going to go someplace very important.
You look at the list of people that are, involved with it and within programming and design, like Tim Sweeney and Cliff Blazinski. I just think it's absolutely mind-blowing to see how the industry's been changed by that game, and kind of everyone was there in the same place at one point. It
was a magical moment. It truly was. But much like my Cyberstorm adventures and work at Sierra, where my job was really the sausage in the back of the house. That was my role when it came to Unreal Tournament. Yes, I was the executive producer. Yes, I signed off on a bunch of stuff. Yes, I played every build. Yes, I was up for crazy hours every morning and every night and banging my head against the wall and on the phone with Epic and yelling and screaming and fighting and everything. Yes. But really, they knew what they were doing. They knew what they wanted to build. And they were fighting and working hard to make their dream come reality. My part was to really arrange all the other parts of publishing, from funding to the box to marketing to PR and all that stuff, making sure that all of those pieces came together. That was incredible. It was incredible to watch Epic do their work because they were so sure about what it was that they wanted to go build.
And I guess you were also selling, online play and the multiplayer experience as well, in a way that it hadn't been kind of sold before, because this was fast-paced multiplayer fun that was very accurate as well. So how did you guys put the message out there marketing-wise about that?
The most important part that we thought that we needed to do was to get the product into people's hands. And so every opportunity that we could to have an editor play with a build, to have a journalist experience the product, we tried very hard to do that. Of course, you're doing this at the same time as this brilliant developer is also trying to improve the technology. And so we would have fairly fireworks-filled conversations about who are we going to meet with next on the journalist side, and what of the product will they see, and which level should they play that's most furthest along, so on and so forth. And it was nonstop sort of firefight in both directions, trying to get the latest and greatest stuff out of Epic and then turn around and make that available for people to play. Because we learned very quickly, if you played the product, even an early version of it, you got it. You understood it, right? You felt it. And that was by far the number one priority.
And yeah, it was also like kind of more people that played it, the better, because more custom maps came out, more user created mods and content came out, and it kind of snowballed, where it became something where people were creating their own game modes. It was just absolutely fantastic to play online. I particularly remember some of the inventions like crazy rocket jumping and stuff that people were doing, and really, twisting the game into something different.
I could not stop playing one of the maps called Facing Worlds, right? Two large spire towers.
Good level. Yeah.
Such a great level with low gravity and to me, it was just this pinnacle of, really being innovative and imaginative on a creative scale of this fictional environment, this make-believe place. And it was just such good fun. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't. Yeah. So when it finally did ship, I think it was Maximum PC at the time was the first outlet. I think that they had or maybe it was another one called Hardware. They were one of the first with a fully featured website in 99. And so it was the first review to go live. And as I recall, it got like 5 out of 5 stars. And they, if you will, the journalist fell over himself trying to describe how much good fun the game was. And we were so pleased to see that.
And a huge aspect of it for me was the music as well, the soundtrack and sound effects. It was just fantastic and pumping. And also, it was quite interesting because the soundtrack, they actually used a tracker technology, which is, the old kind of way of making soundtracks on the computer systems. And it just had that banging kind of dance pace that kept, the games really interesting and fast.
They say visuals are 70% of the product and the other 70% is audio. And I think that the Epic guys loved what they built so much that they put that good 70% into both. And that's ultimately one of the reasons why the game is so cherished and so beloved. And I'm sitting here talking about it nearly 26 years later, here we are.
I was wondering what it was like when it won Game of the Year then, and the bonus kind of pack came out with the Game of the Year edition.
There was a box printing technology. It's still used today, although it's well known. But at the time, this was fairly new. And so when you would go print the box, you had 4 colors, right? You had cyan, magenta, yellow, black. And so you would send these 4 color separated plates, if you will, to the box printing company. And they would have these giant presses, and each pass of the box would have one of the 4 colors added to it. And once all 4 colors together, you got the whole of the box. Well, the new technology was a 5th color, a varnish, an overprint, the ability to make some of the box shiny. And so there was a plate that indicated where this varnish 5th color was supposed to go. And the marketing person, Barbara, super smart gal, had sent all of this material to the box printer, and somehow the box printer had lost the varnish, sort of the key for it as to where the screenshots were on the box. And so the first many thousands of boxes that rolled off the line and somehow made it past internal QC quality check, the box was entirely varnished, not just the screenshots, but the whole thing. The damn thing came out like it was a sugary donut glazed in this varnish. And so when we first started shipping the product, before the Maximum PC article hit the internet, the first retailer who got it, today we call them GameStop, but at the time, I think it was either Software Etc. or Babbage's, one of the two, or maybe Software Boutique. Anyway, one of those stores. And the Epic guys were already sort of assembling themselves. They had been a remote team for a long time, and they were sort of beginning to assemble themselves in North Carolina. And so I received this unbelievably angry phone call from a very senior person at Epic who told me exactly what I could go do with myself several times in a voicemail over this unbelievable mistake, and how lovely it would be to find me in court and sue the holy bejesus out of GT for this terrible mistake. Wow. And so we had thousands of boxes that went to retail that literally looked like they'd been dipped in sugar. And so I got that voicemail, I think early on a Saturday, because I think the boxes hit the shelf early Saturday morning. And I was on the West Coast. I was barely awake when I got the voicemail. And immediately I picked up the phone. I called Barbara, my marketing person. And like, what happened? Like something broke. And she's like, I know. She's like, they called me too. I'm trying to fix it. It's horrible. We're doing an emergency reprint. The box guy, like somehow they didn't understand like where to print the varnish. And it's such a mess. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is horrible. I can't, what do we do? So we devised a plan. And we worked. I went to the office, and she did too, and a couple other support people. And so we worked the rest of that Saturday. We were telling vendors, you will come and you will pick up these 100,000 boxes that are misprinted. They're going to go into a landfill. They're going to be destroyed. And we had to work with finance to get the okay. And then we're going to do a reprint, and the reprint will replace one assembly piece for another assembly piece. And there was another assembler that was involved to be able to make sure that like they got the right box and all this other stuff. And Saturday night, the first review of the game from, again, I believe it was Maximum PC, went live on the internet. And it was 5 out of 5 stars. This is the most amazing game ever. This is so beautiful. I'm so like, I had such a great time. And the multiplayer is amazing. And the music is great. And just gushing about how great the game was. And the last paragraph that the journalist wrote said, and clearly GT understood what an incredible game they have on their hands, that they encrusted the box like a jewel. And it is one of the most beautiful boxes I have ever seen. And I will be proud for the rest of my life to have this box on my shelf. And come Sunday morning, I got the phone call from Epic who said, don't change anything. don't throw away the boxes. Don't fix anything. It's working. Don't touch anything.
I love that so much.
And I had to call Barbara and I'm like, did you get the message? And she's like, yes, I got the message. Oh my God. So we had to call this fleet of, large freight 18-wheeler cargo trucks that were on their way to the landfill Sunday morning. We had to call them. We had to have them turn around. We had to undo all the changes we spent Saturday doing. I was back in the office on Sunday. We were working well into the evening, making sure that the box printer knew what was going on, all this other stuff. We negotiated actually with Epic and we said, well, we unfortunately, this jewel encrusted box, it makes the box very expensive, right? Because we go through all the raw materials of this varnish. We're going through gallons of the stuff, right? We weren't planning on this. And so the box printer needs more money, all this other stuff. So it can't last at this level. And so we agreed the first however many boxes off the line would be jewel encrusted. And after that, we would switch and we'd have a normal box. And that's what we did. And so for the first of those consumers, the first, 50,000, 60,000, 80,000 consumers that bought Unreal Tournament in the US, they got this sugary, jewel encrusted, dripping and drip dried box that literally looked like someone had poured morning cereal, the sugar left over all over it. And eventually everybody else got the normal box that was supposed to be there.
I love
True
that.
Story. True story.
Great story. Happy mistake. There you go.
Yeah, but it was a happy mistake, but it also spoke, quite frankly, it spoke volumes as to how tightly we were trying to work with Epic to make sure that we got everything right. Right?
Yeah.
We knew at this point, we had this amazing runaway success waiting for us. And we accepted the mistake that the box printer had made because we also didn't want to change anything, right? We had millions of pre-orders that we had to solve for. And so we worked really hard. We worked really hard and made all that happen. And ultimately, the success of Unreal Tournament turned into the future of an engine licensing business for Epic. It allowed GT to solve some of the past financial pain and ultimately allowed Bruno Bonnell from Infogram to come along and make an offer to buy out GT. And they did. And so that was it. And so I was working in the San Francisco office. And by the end of 99, I think my last day in the office was December 20th or December 24th, just before the Christmas holiday. And that was it. I did not have that job come January 1st because Infogram had come in, bought the company. The board of directors had approved it. And there was no way that the new entity would continue to pay these salaries in San Francisco. That was it. That was the end of it.
Well, was that when you moved on to MGM? And I was wondering, what it was kind of like working with such a big company, with film licenses as well.
I thought I would take a bunch of time off. I had been so heads down trying to get Unreal Tournament and a bunch of other games, some Duke Nukem and an Indy 500 game and all this other stuff out the door with other producers that worked for me. It was a necessary respite. I ordered a brand new PC and I got 3D cards from friends and I thought, great, I'm going to sit down and play all these games that I haven't had a chance to play. And along came a recruiter knocking on the door and they said, well, there's a job opportunity in Los Angeles and I think you should listen to what they have to say. And I thought to myself, well, I just shipped the game of the year. I'm fine. I'm happy to have conversations with people. Sure. It sounds great. And so I was on a plane and went to LA and was at MGM and met with a lot of really interesting people, but it was very corporate. That was not what I was expecting. I was expecting it to be much more, relaxed and perhaps a little aloof. But instead it was very corporate, very buttoned up. This was very serious business. This content that they make, this is very serious business. I had other job opportunities as well as I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. But ultimately, the opportunity to learn the sausage in the back of the shop, how are film and TV products actually products? How do they get made? How do they get financed? How do you build those things? How do you pull them together? that sounds like a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity. And that's why I ultimately took the MGM offer and said yes and moved to Los Angeles.
So you kind of were working on Bond titles as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So the company had already had quite a bit of success with GoldenEye N64, right? Obviously, highly cherished, incredible, amazing video game. I played the hell out of too. However, it was not the favorite from the filmmakers, because while yes, it was Bond, and yes, it had the elements of a Bond, like what you expect to see Bond do in a movie. It didn't have everything. It didn't have gadgets. It didn't have girls. It didn't have cars. It was sort of Bond only in name with a gun and amazing multiplayer with a golden gun.
Yes, yeah, it was a runaway success in that sense. I think you did The World Is Not Enough afterwards, and was it hard to kind of do a follow-on kind of, full serious kind of Bond game after this kind of multiplayer action, but also after the reputation that GoldenEye had as well?
It wasn't hard to make the game. It was hard to manage everybody's expectations inside of the studio and with the filmmakers, with, Barbara and Michael and her amazing staff, their amazing staff between Dan, Jack, and Eon. It was not hard to make the game. I had done a bunch of times with a lot of really interesting people. And of course, World Is Not Enough was built by Electronic Arts. And so EA knows what they're doing and they know how to make video games. The hard part was the expectation management, right? Why doesn't World Is Not Enough sell as many copies as GoldenEye N64? Why doesn't it make as much money? Why doesn't it? Why blah, 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 blah. Lots of questions. That was different. And that taught me a lot. And I realized early on that I would have to be much more of a business person and not creative producer, not creative executive. And I relished that opportunity to grow. And so across the Bond games that we built at MGM with Electronic Arts, we kept trying to advance the things that made the film series unique. The locations, the gadgets, the girls, the cars. And we really wanted to expose more and more and more of that to players, where we always felt the need to compare ourselves was the depth and the pacing of story from the films. And we kind of didn't like World Is Not Enough was great, but we fell into the usual video game movie trap where if you as the player make choices that the movie actor or actress did not choose, then in the game you would perish. And that seemed wrong, right? Because then we don't give the game player the opportunity to explore. We don't give the game player the opportunity to, hey, maybe there's a different way to solve this problem, which is half the fun of the video game anyway, is having multiple routes or multiple methods to be able to advance and progress. And so that felt like a loss. So it wasn't until we got past World Is Not Enough and then Agent Under Fire and Nightfire on sort of next gen on PS2 and ultimately on Xbox. And so it wasn't until we got to Everything or Nothing, which the genesis of that began before we shipped Nightfire. And the idea was we need our own story. We need something that is credible and truly believable by the audience, that is of theatrical quality. And in order to do that, yes, we need to have real writers. We also need to have a real cast. And that's where the genesis of Everything or Nothing came from, which to me, I feel like was like one of the best Bond games post GoldenEye N64 that we had ever done.
I was just wondering as well, did you get to meet any of the cast in any of the kind of promotional PR stuff that you did? Oh, sure. Lovely people. You shake their hand, you say, hi, I'm from MGM. They're like, oh, hello. Like, how nice to meet you. Like, nice to get to know you. Sure. Very British. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very quick. But they're busy doing their job. They're busy doing voiceover or being 3D cyber stand or providing B-roll footage for marketing and PR and things like that. And so, I'm just in the room for a moment. In fact, the probably the biggest thing that I worked really hard on, where I got to spread some creative wing, was on the voiceover work with the voice actress from London who could create a voice that sounded an awful lot like Dame Judi Dench. And she was the one that we used for Nightfire. And she was fantastic and amazing. And please, God, forgive me for not remembering her name. But she was wonderful. And in the midst of this, so we were a couple of takes and a couple of lines into the dialogue for M in Nightfire in the recording session. And I was there with a bunch of people from EA and all this other stuff. I just didn't feel like we were getting the whole of the traction of what was really happening. And because I had done video game stuff and I built a bunch of games in my past, I sort of jumped into that role and started giving her an awful lot of voice direction. And after the game shipped, the EA people came to me and they said, "Hey, did you know that some of the editors at the magazines said that this was some of the best voice direction they've ever heard in a video game?" And I was like, "No." And so somewhere in my scrapbooks of all my career stuff is, me having cut some of those articles out of magazines and being proud of, being able to add a little bit of moxie to some of the work.
That's awesome. I'd love to talk to you for hours and hours, but this has been a fantastic interview, Neil. And I know you've done some great mobile titles as well, and you've done a lot more. So I was wondering kind of what are you up to nowadays?
Thanks for asking so much. These days, I have my own consulting practice, Haldar & Co. And I have a mission to help developers and publishers, medium to large size, figure out really this business of games, how to make money, how to do well, how to make sure that your people feel success, right? This video game stuff is actually complicated and hard. And I've done this for so long. My job now is to help those studios and help those publishers find success faster, make money, and have fun doing it.
That's awesome. I hope you help a lot of people, and it's definitely good to have someone so experienced doing a job like that. Well, I've really enjoyed having you on the podcast, Neil.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed being here and talking about my past. Being able to talk about my past is a unique opportunity. Thank you so much for having me.